They said he was too small to fight. At 5'5" and barely 100 pounds soaking wet, Audie Murphy looked more like a high school freshman than a soldier. When he walked into that recruiting office in 1942, his baby face still smooth and his eyes impossibly young, the recruiter actually laughed. The Army turned him down. The Marines turned him down. The Navy wouldn't even consider him. But this scrawny kid from Texas had already survived things that would break most men, and he wasn't about to let something as simple as his size stop him from doing what he believed was right. What none of those recruiters could see was that inside that small frame lived the heart of someone who had already fought battles most people couldn't imagine, someone who would go on to kill an estimated 240 enemy soldiers and become the most decorated combat soldier in American history. This is the story of how a dirt-poor orphan from Texas became a legend. Audie Leon Murphy was born in 1925 in a sharecropper's shack near Kingston, Texas, so poor that the family didn't even have enough money for a proper floor. He was the 7th of 12 children, and from the moment he could walk, he was working. His father was a sharecropper who drifted from job to job, often abandoning the family for months at a time before eventually leaving for good. His mother did her best, but she was fighting a losing battle against poverty, malnutrition, and the simple mathematics of too many mouths to feed. Audie learned to hunt when he was 5 years old, not for sport but for survival. If he didn't bring home rabbits or squirrels, his younger siblings went hungry. He became an expert marksman out of pure necessity, learning to make every shot count because ammunition cost money they didn't have. By the time Audie was 16, his mother died. She was only 42, worn out by poverty and hardship. With his father long gone and the family completely destitute, the younger children were parceled out to an orphanage. Audie and his older brother worked odd jobs, trying desperately to keep the family together, but it was no use. The world had dealt them an impossible hand. When Audie heard about Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, something clicked in his mind. His country was at war, his family was scattered, and he had nothing left to lose. He tried to enlist the day after his 16th birthday, but the military had standards, and a malnourished teenager who looked 12 didn't meet them. He tried again when he turned 17. Still too small, they said. Still too young looking. Come back when you've grown some, kid. But Audie Murphy wasn't the kind of person who took no for an answer. He'd been told his whole life that he wasn't good enough, that he was too poor, too small, too young, too much of nothing. Finally, in June 1942, after his 18th birthday and with his sister's permission since he was still technically a minor, the Army reluctantly accepted him. They probably figured he'd wash out in basic training. They figured wrong. That kid who'd been hunting to feed his family since he was 5, who could shoot the eye out of a squirrel at 50 yards, who'd survived poverty that would have killed weaker people, turned out to be exactly what the Army needed. He excelled in training, particularly on the rifle range where he outshot men twice his size. His instructors noticed something unusual about him. He never got rattled. When other recruits were panicking during exercises, Murphy stayed calm. When they were exhausted, he kept going. Whatever everyone else had inside them, Murphy seemed to have more of it. In February 1943, Private Murphy shipped out to North Africa with Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. He was 19 years old and still looked like a kid playing dress-up in his older brother's uniform. The other soldiers called him Baby and Shorty, and some of them wondered if he'd even make it through his first firefight. They found out soon enough. The 3rd Infantry Division saw action in the invasion of Sicily in July 1943, and that's where Audie Murphy went from being a soldier to being a warrior. In his first real combat, he killed 2 Italian officers trying to escape on horseback, dropping them both with his rifle at long range. His captain noticed. So did the Germans and Italians they were fighting, who quickly learned that the small American with the steady hands and the dead eyes was not someone you wanted to see looking at you through his rifle sights. Sicily was just the beginning. The 3rd Infantry Division landed at Salerno on the Italian mainland in September 1943, and the fighting there was brutal. This wasn't like the movies. Men died screaming, calling for their mothers, bleeding out in muddy foxholes far from home. Murphy saw friends killed, watched good men die in agony, and something inside him hardened. He wasn't the laughing farm boy anymore. He was becoming something else, something focused and lethal. His commanders noticed his natural ability to read a battlefield, to know where the enemy would be, to make split-second decisions under fire that saved lives. They promoted him to corporal, then sergeant. He was still barely 20 years old. The fighting in Italy was a nightmare. The Germans had every advantage, fighting from defensive positions in mountainous terrain, and they made the Americans pay in blood for every yard of ground. Murphy's unit fought through the winter of 1943 to 44, and it was hell. They were cold, wet, exhausted, and constantly under fire. Men broke down mentally, unable to handle the stress. But Murphy kept going. He led patrol after patrol into enemy territory, brought back prisoners for interrogation, and killed German soldiers with methodical efficiency. He earned his first decoration for valor in Italy when he single-handedly held off a German attack, killing several enemy soldiers and allowing his company to reorganize. It wouldn't be his last. In January 1944, near the town of Anzio, Murphy took command of his platoon when his platoon leader was wounded. He was 20 years old and leading 40 men in combat against battle-hardened German troops. Most of them were older than him. Many of them had more education, but none of them questioned his leadership because they'd seen what he could do. When Murphy told you to move, you moved, because he had a gift for knowing where the enemy fire would be and where it wouldn't. Following his orders kept you alive. He won the Bronze Star for his actions at Anzio, and then the Silver Star for destroying a German machine gun position that had his company pinned down. He did it by crawling through enemy fire, getting close enough to throw grenades, and then finishing the job with his rifle. The official citation made it sound tactical and clean. The reality was that Murphy had looked death in the face and decided he wasn't interested. The invasion of southern France in August 1944 should have been easier than Italy, but war doesn't work that way. Murphy's unit fought its way north through France, clearing German positions, liberating towns, and taking casualties every single day. Murphy was now a platoon leader with the rank of second lieutenant, still looking absurdly young but with eyes that had seen too much. He fought through the Vosges Mountains that fall, where the weather was terrible and the Germans were fighting desperately to defend their homeland. On October 2, 1944, Murphy's best friend was killed by German machine gun fire right in front of him. Something snapped. Murphy went into a rage, charging the German position alone, killing the machine gun crew and then turning the weapon on other German soldiers, firing until it ran out of ammunition. When it was over, he'd killed or wounded at least a dozen enemy soldiers. His men had to physically restrain him to stop him from continuing the attack. He earned the Distinguished Service Cross for that action, the second highest military decoration in the U.S. Army. But Murphy's most famous action, the one that would earn him the Medal of Honor, came on January 26, 1945, near the town of Holtzwihr in eastern France. His company was ordered to hold a position against a German counterattack, and Murphy knew they were in trouble. The Germans were coming with tanks, infantry, and everything they had. Murphy's company was under strength, exhausted, and dug into defensive positions at the edge of a forest. When the Germans attacked, it was overwhelming. 6 German tanks and at least 250 infantry came at them in a coordinated assault. Murphy ordered his men to fall back to the forest while he stayed forward with his field telephone to direct artillery fire. His position was quickly overrun, and most of his men thought he was dead. But Murphy wasn't dead. He climbed onto a burning M10 tank destroyer that had been hit and was in danger of exploding at any moment. The .50 caliber machine gun mounted on it was still functional, and Murphy began firing at the advancing Germans. He was completely exposed, standing on top of a burning vehicle filled with ammunition and fuel, using a telephone in one hand to call in artillery strikes while firing the machine gun with the other. The Germans couldn't believe what they were seeing. This small American officer was standing in full view, firing at them, calling in artillery that was landing so close it was hitting around his own position. They shot at him with rifles, machine guns, and tank cannons. They couldn't miss at that range, but somehow they did, or when they hit the tank destroyer, Murphy wasn't where the rounds landed. For over an hour, Murphy stood on that burning tank destroyer and fought off the entire German assault. He killed dozens of German soldiers, directing his fire with the same calm precision he'd learned hunting rabbits as a child. He called in artillery strikes danger close, so close that his own men thought he was calling it in on himself. The telephone line was cut by German fire, and Murphy climbed down under fire to splice it back together, then climbed back up on the burning vehicle to continue fighting. His men later said they could hear him over the sound of battle, calmly adjusting artillery fire as if he were on a training exercise instead of standing on a vehicle that could explode any second while hundreds of Germans were trying to kill him. Finally, out of ammunition and wounded in the leg, Murphy climbed down and organized a counterattack with the men he'd ordered to fall back earlier. The Germans, thinking they were facing a much larger force, retreated. Murphy had single-handedly stopped an assault by a force that outnumbered his company 6-1. When it was over and officers came to investigate what had happened, they couldn't believe the story. Murphy had killed at least 50 German soldiers personally, possibly many more, while wounded and standing on a vehicle that was literally on fire. The Medal of Honor citation was written, and on June 2, 1945, Audie Murphy received America's highest military decoration from General Jacob Devers. By the end of the war, Murphy had received 33 military awards and decorations, including every combat award for valor that the United States could give him, plus 5 decorations from France and Belgium. He was 20 years old. But the war wasn't done with Audie Murphy. He came home in 1945 to a hero's welcome, appearing on the cover of Life magazine, and America fell in love with the baby-faced warrior who had done impossible things. He was invited to Hollywood, where actor James Cagney saw him on the cover of Life and suggested he become an actor. Murphy thought it was ridiculous, but he had no job skills except farming and fighting, and he didn't want to go back to poverty. So he went to Hollywood and learned to act. He eventually appeared in 44 films, including playing himself in To Hell and Back, the movie based on his autobiography. The movie was Universal's highest-grossing film until Jaws came along in 1975. But Hollywood and fame couldn't heal what the war had broken inside him. Murphy suffered from what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder, though in his time they called it battle fatigue, if they called it anything at all. He had terrible nightmares, slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow, and struggled with depression and anxiety. He became addicted to sleeping pills and had to lock himself in a hotel room for a week to break the addiction through sheer force of will, the same will that had kept him fighting when any sane person would have run. He spoke openly about his struggles at a time when admitting mental health problems could destroy a career, and he became an advocate for better treatment of veterans with PTSD. He testified before Congress about the need for more research and better care for veterans suffering from the psychological wounds of war. Murphy's personal life was complicated. He married twice, the second marriage lasting until his death. He had 2 sons. He made money in Hollywood but lost much of it in bad business deals and gambling. He was generous to a fault, often giving money to struggling veterans or anyone who needed help, sometimes to his own financial detriment. The kid who'd grown up with nothing never quite learned to hold on to money, perhaps because he never had it to hold on to in the first place. He continued to work in films and television through the 1960s, though he never became a major star. He was always more comfortable being Audie Murphy the war veteran than Audie Murphy the actor. On May 28, 1971, Audie Murphy was flying in a private plane from Atlanta to Martinsville, Virginia, for a business meeting. The weather was terrible, with heavy fog and rain. The plane crashed into Brush Mountain near Catawba, Virginia, killing everyone on board. Murphy was 45 years old. When they found his body in the wreckage, he was still small, still looked younger than his years, still the kid from Texas who'd somehow become a legend. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. His grave is the second most visited at Arlington, after President Kennedy's. The numbers tell part of the story. Audie Murphy killed an estimated 240 enemy soldiers during World War II. He earned the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, the Legion of Merit, 2 Bronze Stars with V device, 3 Purple Hearts, and more than 24 other American and foreign decorations. He rose from private to first lieutenant in less than 3 years. But numbers don't tell you about the 5'5" kid who learned to shoot because his siblings were hungry, who lost his mother at 16 and his childhood even earlier, who walked into recruiting offices again and again until someone finally said yes, who looked at impossible odds and decided to fight anyway. Murphy's legacy extends far beyond his military decorations. He was one of the first high-profile veterans to speak openly about PTSD and advocate for better mental health care for veterans. His autobiography, To Hell and Back, sold millions of copies and gave Americans a raw, Honest look at what combat was really like, not the sanitized Hollywood version but the terrifying, exhausting, heartbreaking reality. He showed a generation of veterans that it was okay to struggle with what they'd been through, that needing help didn't make you weak. In a time when men were expected to just tough it out and not talk about their feelings, Murphy talked. He saved lives by doing so, lives of veterans who might otherwise have suffered in silence or worse. The kid from Texas who was told he was too small to fight became proof that courage has nothing to do with size. That determination and skill and sheer unwillingness to quit can overcome almost any obstacle. That someone who starts with nothing can become anything. Audie Murphy's story is uniquely American in that way, the idea that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. He started in a sharecropper's shack with a dirt floor and ended up in Arlington National Cemetery, honored by a grateful nation. He went from hunting rabbits to feed his family to standing on a burning tank destroyer fighting off an entire German assault. He went from being illiterate to writing a best-selling book. He went from being nobody to being someone whose name is still spoken with reverence. What made Audie Murphy special wasn't that he was born with some extraordinary gift. It was that he refused to accept the limitations everyone else tried to put on him. Too small to be a soldier? He became the best soldier. Too poor and uneducated to be an officer? He became a lieutenant. Too traumatized by war to have a normal life? He built one anyway, imperfect as it was, and helped others do the same. Every single time life or circumstances or other people told him no, he found a way to turn it into yes. That's what made him a hero. Not just the killing of enemy soldiers or the medals on his chest, but the fundamental refusal to let anything stop him from doing what he believed was right. Today, when young soldiers go through basic training, they learn about Audie Murphy. His story is taught as an example of courage, leadership, and dedication. The Army has a club named after him at Fort Hood, Texas, where his story is preserved and honored. But Murphy would probably be uncomfortable with all the attention. He never thought he was special. He thought he was just doing his job, doing what needed to be done. That humility, that sense that he was just another soldier trying to get through the war, made him even more remarkable. He never forgot where he came from or what it was like to have nothing. He never stopped being that kid from Texas who learned to shoot because his family was hungry. Audie Murphy's life proves that heroes aren't born, they're made. They're made by circumstances that would break other people. They're made by choices to keep fighting when giving up would be easier. They're made by standing up when everyone else is falling down, by doing the right thing when the wrong thing would be safer, by being willing to sacrifice everything for something bigger than yourself. That baby-faced kid who walked into recruiting offices and got laughed at became the most decorated soldier in American history not because he was superhuman, but because he was intensely, determinedly human. He felt fear and kept fighting. He felt pain and kept going. He saw horrors that gave him nightmares for the rest of his life, and he still stood on that burning tank destroyer and fought off an army because his men needed him to. That's the real story of Audie Murphy. Not just the medals and the kills and the decorations, but the indomitable human spirit that refused to quit no matter what. The poor kid who became a warrior. The warrior who became a hero. The hero who never stopped being human. From that sharecropper's shack to Arlington National Cemetery. From hunting rabbits for food to hunting German soldiers for his country, from nobody to legend, Audie Murphy's journey shows us what's possible when determination meets opportunity, when courage meets necessity, when one person decides that the obstacles in their way are just things to climb over. He looked 15 but killed 240 enemy soldiers, yes. But more importantly, he proved that greatness can come from anywhere, that heroes can be 5'5", and that the measure of a person has nothing to do with their size or where they started and everything to do with what they choose to do when the moment comes. Audie Murphy's moment came, and he was ready. America has never forgotten, and never will.